So here we are, everybody. We're doing Facebook Live in Olympia, Washington. Right behind me is all the awesome people that are doing this lawsuit suing Inslee over the mask mandate and many of his other unconstitutional orders. So you're going to be able to watch it, listen in, and be able to see the behind the scenes thanks to this really awesome guy. That's Josh right there. Josh is going to record a really high quality one that we're going to be able to have later. But for right now, this phone is going to allow you to be able to see the whole thing. So grateful to all you guys being able to have a chance to watch this thing. And we're about to start. And so we're going to turn it over and do our deed. So here we go. There we go. Do your magic.
I don't camp on it, so right now. I don't even have Facebook. Getting an answer from the state, and I guess that's extremely one more and coming back here, they reserve soccer teams. We don't have soccer teams when it comes to preliminary so does he have your still qualified?
We'll hand it over and have you do your.
Yeah, I can do it too.
So, Don and Dean, so what we want to do is you're going to be with us. So, it's not safe for one. I love it.
That is so.
Love it. Great. We're gonna be done really fast, so you can get going.
If everyone bunches up behind you, you're not going to see anything.
Are you both with
No. I'm with 13.
Yeah, the attack, when the initial attack occurred, or what, I was reading in your.
That's good to see you. Looks like you're going to be representing the entire
it has to
media,
be at the
so
time of the attack or the invasion.
the race station invasion. You're the proxy for Brandon. Proxy for You're the proxy for who else do we got? Steve Eldridge. You're filling in.
Yeah. Who were you with for?
Cairo. And just so you know, the one I emailed you was the original link.
And you can do, whatever's necessary in public
Yeah. But it's basically the same concept, but it's just more robust in its stuff.
So they wouldn't hear our case yet, the federal one.
The feds are still planning on scheduling the case. That means the unfortunately
Okay, so see, it's not totally out.
I think so. Does everybody have their?
Let me.
You get yourself set.
When it first started, he basically
Warm them up. Then I turn it over to Steve. What's that? It's not like it wasn't she didn't want it, I just didn't. I'm like picking my battles. So you got him with he's got 2 and you do 3.
Чем Eyman здесь, он делает speech, он идет
Steve, you'll be after me, and then Dean and Lisa
на
everybody do their deeds.
губернатора.
So come over here.
Это наш клиент, который нас сегодня представляет.
Come with us.
Да, сейчас мой босс
Come hither.
будет.
I'm going to give you an extra one.
I love
You
this.
got it?
Thank you.
Good for you. Yeah, that's a good idea.
This will be a record. This is 4 cameras.
So just so you know where we're going to do it, I'll do a little bit, and Steve will do a lot, and then I'll do some stuff after him, and then we'll turn it over to the other plaintiffs and talk about it, and then take your questions. So that's kind of how we'll do it. Really happy people are here today. This is another sueinslee.com lawsuit. This one taking on the unconstitutional mask mandate. And I think it's a really important point that doing this litigation means that we have the judiciary second guessing what the executive branch is doing right now. And I think a lot of people are frustrated by what our governor is doing, and they want to have a chance to say, is this really legal? Is this really constitutional? Well, let's find out. You don't know unless you ask the courts. So with that, the sueinslee.com lawsuit number 4 moves forward. So we're going to turn it over to Steve, who's our brilliant attorney. Very happy that Steve was willing to tackle this thing. We have a great group of plaintiffs here. I'm honored to be one of them. But the lead plaintiff's actually Clint Didier, who's not here. He's currently farming in the Tri-Cities, earning a living. So we'll turn it over to Steve, and then it'll go to me, and then we'll hear from everybody. So let's go for Steve. Let's hear for Steve. Yay!
This is Steve Pigeon. I'm an attorney up in Everett, Washington, a P-I-D-G-E-O-N, Steve Pigeon. And I'm the lead counsel on the Didier versus Inslee case that has been brought in the United States District Court in Tacoma, and it's on similar grounds. The difference is that in the federal case, we brought federal issues of unconstitutionality. We're alleging that the governor is in fact infringing on the First Amendment right to freely assemble, the First Amendment right to speech, that he's engaged in the Fifth Amendment taking, and he's engaged in unlawful discrimination under the 14th Amendment, treatment in violation of the Equal Protection Clause, in delineating between non-essential and essential Washingtonians. Now, in addition to that, had initially filed in the federal court what's called pendent state claims, and the pendent state claims have since been ruled in another case out of Pennsylvania to be not cognizable in the federal court. At least they're unwilling to take a look at the pendent state claims on their own. And it has to do with 11th Amendment immunity and so forth. So we have withdrawn our state claims at the federal court, and we're now bringing a state claim case in the state court. Now, coincidentally, the Secretary of Health, Mr. Reisman, has added this, as far as I'm concerned, it's a draconian, absurd order that he was so kind, the Secretary Reisman was so kind as to allow us to take our masks off when we're sleeping in our home. That is an unbridled invasion and molestation of First Amendment rights, and not only rights protected under the federal Constitution, but also protected under Washington's Constitution. Now, there is something that no one is willing to talk about, and in particular Governor Inslee isn't willing to talk about, which is that the state Constitution, Article 2, Section 42, for your reading pleasure, is quite concise and delineates with specificity what authority the governor has in the event of an emergency. An emergency under that constitutional provision must be an invasion or a rebellion, not some trumped up deal like he's got going right now. And so he claims that he has the authority to exercise emergency powers that include lockdown, that include mandatory expression, which is what the wearing of a mask is. The wearing of a mask is your expression that you say publicly, I am submitting to the unconstitutional authority of the governor. And that is a forced expression explicitly prohibited by the First Amendment. But more importantly, the state claims that we're alleging, we're asking Judge Lanise, a great qualified judge in Thurston County, to take a look and determine whether or not this statute, RCW 3808, or one particular paragraph of that is constitutional in granting the governor to do whatever he wants to trounce Article 1, Section 1, Section 2, Section 3, Section 5, etc., which is what he's doing. And he doesn't have that authority. In fact, Article 2, Section 42 says specifically, you cannot touch those rights at all. Even in an emergency, even if Seattle had been bombed, you can't touch those rights. So once we ask the judge here to determine that, in fact, any provision by any legislative mandate giving the governor more the Constitution is unconstitutional, and if he does so declare, then we're asking the judge to enter a preliminary injunction striking down the governor's orders that begin with 2025, 2025.1, .2, .3, .4, .5, and this patently absurd directive that came out of the Secretary of Health, who has no constitutional authority whatsoever to end the constitutional rights of Washingtonians. So that's what this lawsuit is about. Now we have a 33-page First Amendment complaint here, and I'm going to give this copy to Essex because I owed him a copy the last time I brought it, and because he's such a great reporter. But the fact is, The fact is that what we have going here is this is an extremely important case. Now, we're bolstered today by the fact that a federal judge in Illinois just struck down that governor's orders. The circuit court struck it down and said, hey, you don't have the authority to end the Constitution summarily on your whim. And we have been struggling to get to a judicial determination of this particular hearing. Of course, as you know, we have to combat a law office, the Attorney General's office, which has 1,000 attorneys in it. So this is pretty much where we are. So if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this time.
Tell him about Judge Lenny's and his history in our state on taking on the establishment.
Well, you know, the nice part about the courthouse here in Thurston County is that the judges here have to deal with major political issues routinely. For instance, ballot title.
Do you know how to turn up the audio when I'm doing the live?
First impression here at this courthouse, and not subject to appeal later.
I can't find the.
Is one of these courageous judges who recently said that the Public Disclosure Records Act does apply to the legislature, and that's a pretty strong stand. In other words,
I know
this courthouse has got a history of being courageous and standing up for the third level of government in the state, which is the judicial branch. So we're hoping to establish a very strong record here and to get a favorable opinion, because the law, quite frankly, is well on our side. We literally have 200 years of history saying that making a livelihood is a fundamental right. Political speech in the public square is a fundamental right. The right to freely assemble and to petition for a redress of grievances peacefully is a fundamental right. The right to have your property not taken except upon due process and with just remuneration is a fundamental right. And equally important, the right to not be discriminated against on an unequal basis, to say this Washingtonian is non-essential and this one is essential. That violates everything known under the 14th Amendment and is reprehensible, not cognizable in law, and needs to be struck down.
How is you filed something on Monday, and this is an amended complaint? How is this bolstered as far as the mask mandate? Because he recently said businesses are mandated to not serve customers that aren't wearing it. Does the new lawsuit, the amended complaint, kind of tackle that?
Well, I mean, the problem with this is that, first of all, you know, the Secretary of Health is not my doctor, and yet the Secretary of Health is engaged in giving me medical advice. And even under his edict and under his protocols, he announced specific exemptions and exceptions. For instance, it is impossible to go and eat without taking your mask down to put your food in your mouth. Now the question is, if that's the case, when are you eating and drinking? Are you eating and drinking only when the fork gets to your mouth, or are you eating and drinking when you sit at the table, or are you eating and drinking when you enter the restaurant? I mean, it's a question.
Just come on.
Right? And also, he has also granted an exemption for exercise. Well, you know, when you're a guy my age, getting up out of the chair is exercise, right? So, you know, so there's huge questions. And then the governor comes down and says, well, I'm just going to mandate that these masks in general, without specificity, are mandated. For what purpose? Well, when you talk about the governor's orders, and this is an ongoing thing, and this is why this complaint had to be amended, because the governor is amending these things as he goes along. I'm going to do this edict, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that. The fact is, when the governor comes out and says, I'm mandating the masks, irrespective of any exception that the Secretary of Health has said, irrespective of any exception that the CDC has said, any exception that anyone else in any other health department anywhere else has said, what he is mandating is speech. He's mandating the speech that says you will express yourself in the public square as I am in submission to the government by wearing your mask. That's what he's mandating.
Right.
And that is reprehensible under the First Amendment.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's awesome. Steve is great. Let's hear from Steve. Hey.
Благодарность Стивену и боссу, который рассказал,
My
почему мы делаем
comments
файл.
about this is, and I'm so glad Steve went first, because he knows this stuff backwards and forwards. We're very, very fortunate to have him representing us. The thing that jumped out at me is that the South Dakota governor is a governor that said, I don't see anywhere in the Constitution my power to be able to shut down a private business. And so I'm not going to do it because it's not in the Constitution. She's one of those governors that also said, I'm not going to mandate everyone wear a mask. If people want to wear masks, they can do it in South Dakota, but she's not mandating it. She's not imposing fines if you don't do it. She's not sending in like hit squads from like SWAT teams and liquor control board people, because she said, I'm going to trust the people of South Dakota to use their own common sense. I'm going to treat them like adults, and I'm going to actually count on their personal responsibility to be able to do it. And what she's finding is much greater. She's treating people like adults. If you treat them like children, you're going to end up getting people rebelling against it. And I think that when a governor is this insecure and this weak as a leader, he feels that he needs to make it clear who's boss and who's not. And we did not elect him to be our father.
We are the boss.
We actually elected him to represent us, not rule over us. And this whole idea that because people, not everybody was wearing a mask, he cracked down and said, I'm going to make everyone wear a mask. And he gets into the micromanaging of you must wear a mask when you're in church. Don't have to wear a mask when you're sleeping. The micromanaging of our lives goes to a level that I'm just not comfortable with. I don't like the idea of having a governor that feels that he has to run the lives of 7 million people. Me, I've got my hands full just running my own life. I have no interest in running the lives of 7 million citizens. What we did was we elected a governor, and unfortunately we have a governor that doesn't believe in representative democracy anymore. All these things that he's doing are without public hearings, without the House and the Senate taking votes. This is all one person making decisions on a daily basis, and as Lisa pointed out, and maybe changing his mind the next day. And let's say we're going to go to phase 1, but today you're 1.5, but I might take you back to 1. It is this hodgepodge of whatever Jay Inslee feels like on a given day. And that is not our form of government. That is not what we signed up for. And these lawsuits, which I'm so proud of, actually forced Inslee to open up the schools in the fall because he saw that there was complete no validity to the idea of shutting down schools. How are you fulfilling the constitutional mandate that kids get a good education? By bringing that lawsuit, we forced them to actually do what is the right thing to do, and that's to allow the schools to open in the fall.
Thank you so much for doing that.
That's a really good fight, and I'm really, really proud of that. And then the other thing that this lawsuit is tackling is we have business owners here that are shut down, aren't able to service their customers. Their employees are being hurt, they're being hurt, their customers aren't being serviced, and we have a governor that basically says, if you donate it to me, you can stay open. You're essential. If you're in my stock portfolio, you can stay open. But if you're somebody on the other side, you're non-essential. And that is disparate treatment under the Constitution. We're challenging it in federal court. I think it's a good thing that we're bringing forward in state court. And I really want to emphasize this, and I can't emphasize it enough, is that Jay Inslee is on a power trip right now. He is really enjoying the control that he has because he doesn't have to worry about these petty legislators. He doesn't have to worry about the voters. He's just doing whatever he feels like doing on a daily basis. And I just am so uncomfortable with how he seems to be perfectly happy doing this. And I see these press conferences and I see the media trying to ask him some tough questions, and sometimes they don't. But the reality it's one person making all decisions for everybody. That is not our form of government. We need to elect somebody, thank you very much for a self-serving moment here. We need to elect somebody that respects the people enough to not make those decisions unilaterally. Right now we have people, and we did not sign up for that. No. And so these lawsuits, I've been criticized. They said lawsuits take too long. A lot of people aren't going to make it to November. And we need to do something now, right now, to open up Washington immediately, like now. Like South Dakota never shut down. South Dakota did not disrespect the people this much. South Dakota ended up finding that they were actually able to get better compliance and better outcomes because they trusted people rather than trying to rule over people. And so that's the model I would follow if elected. I'm really excited that there's wonderful people that are willing to step forward and do this lawsuit. Lisa has been just an extraordinary leader. on raising the money necessary in order for us to be able to do these lawsuits. And we raised so much, we were able to not only sue them in federal court, that we're doing this state action. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa. And there would not be a lawsuit now if it wasn't for Lisa Thomas from the Tri-Cities. So let's hear from Lisa.
Лиса из Просвіти Мирс с нами сегодня.
I guess
также.
I do forget about the fundraising part, and that is a big part.
It's
So
a huge part.
I do want to say a big thank you to all the donors and to our attorney. Everything's going to our attorney, which, as you heard him speak, so you know we've got the best. So here we go. Lisa Thomas, and I'm a registered nurse. On February 29th, 2020, our governor proclaimed a state of emergency, citing he needed to flatten the curve to ensure our healthcare system would not be overwhelmed. He ordered us to stay home and stay safe, and we did that. On April 9th, 2020, the state decided it no longer needed the 250-bed field hospital set up by the Army Corps of Engineers, and they closed it down. To me, that indicates that the emergency is over. You no longer need the assistance of the federal government. You have conferred behind the scenes with all your people during the emergency management period, and you have decided that you no longer need the emergency beds that the president sent to help you with. But on April 15th, 2020, the legislature agreed to extend the emergency order until it was determined to be over, or May 4th, 2020, whichever came first. May 4th came and went. And not only were the restrictions prolonged, but they became even more unconstitutional and more oppressive. On June 24th, our governor allowed Weissman, who has no constitutional authority whatsoever, to issue his own restrictive proclamations. This is tyranny under the guise of safety. It is disingenuous of the governor to say he cares for our well-being while not providing the very basic reassurance of our inalienable rights, our civil rights. Our First Amendment is a civil right for all, not just politicians, Jay. The freedom of choice is a fundamental liberty. I choose not to wear a mask because it is a violation of my freedom of conscience. It would force me to espouse support for a nonsensical order that violates my civil rights with government intrusion and invasion of privacy. Our governor's proclamations shock the conscience by violating our constitutional rights, removing our liberty to earn a living, and using fear of a virus or masks or surveillance or forced vaccines to get us to comply. June 26th, a federal judge for the state of New York struck down that governor's mandate, stating he was, quote, exceeding his authority. Just today, the Illinois Circuit Judge ordered that their governor can no longer govern the state via special emergency powers. These are precedents. We are demanding the court to reinstate our constitutional rights and remove our governor's emergency proclamations. He is exceeding his authority. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Oh, man.
Very good.
Dean? Good for you.
My name is Dean Wellsfree. I'm the owner of Shakey's Pizza Parlor in Pasco, Washington.
Spell your last name, please.
Wellsfree is W-E-L-L-S-F-R-Y.
Дин из Паска приехал
I'm
сюда в Олимпию.
here because I'm angry. I'm here because my business 4 months. I've got 20 people in unemployment. I'm here because our governor has overstepped his authority. There is no emergency. On February 29, there was a perceived emergency. There was a perceived President Clinton shut down the flights from China. Everybody was scared. There was hospital ships to New York, to LA. There was a hospital built in Seattle based on what Governor Inslee wanted. On April 6th, the state asked for that hospital to be shut down, as Lisa said. Ending the emergency. There was no emergency. Yesterday, just yesterday, Governor Inslee said because of a spike in cases, Yakima has a hospital that was overrun and they had to transport patients over the mountains. That is false information. The only reason the hospitals are full is because there were no elective surgeries for 3 months. They have allowed those, so the hospitals are now full with people getting elective surgeries. There are 10 to 15% COVID in these hospitals, all of them. There's 68 people in Benton and Franklin County right now that are in the hospital with COVID. Minute. That's not many cases at all. There is no emergency. We were just allowed last night at midnight to open at 1.5, whatever that is. I can now, my restaurant is like an adult Chuck E. Cheese. I have no outdoor seating yet. I'm allowed now to have 50% capacity of outdoor seating, whatever that means. There's no emergency. We need to open up. I'm tired of it. We need to go on the offense. I'm tired of this crap defense and open.
Beautiful. Well done. Well done.
Yeah.
Now we're going to hear from Rowan Wilson, and she'll spell her name, I'm sure.
Hi, I'm Rowan Wilson, R-O-W-A-N, W-A-L-S-N. I'm laid off from Expedia. How many people miss traveling?
Me.
I'll be succinct. As someone with her MBA in finance, 3 points. One, this is obviously unconstitutional. We have seen that. Tim has articulated that very well. But number two, the numbers don't add up. They just don't add up. The governor keeps talking about the world, the data, and the science. Where is it? Show it to us. The CDC has conflated those with antibodies, testing positive for antibodies of COVID, with those who actually have COVID, the few in the hospital. How many people know someone? I'm sorry for those people who have lost those that died with COVID rather than of COVID. Let's look at the numbers. None of this makes sense. And my third point, what is coming next? How much more are we expected to be able to give up? Do you want to have your children ripped from your homes?
No.
Do you want to stay, and that's out of the governor's own lips, contact tracing?
No.
Do you want to be forced a vaccination? which
Absolutely not.
Who knows
No.
what is in it?
No.
What comes next?
Control.
We can all agree that this is absolutely about control, and that we're all perfectly capable of deciding as adults for ourselves.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well done. Any other plaintiffs? Do we have any other plaintiffs with our group? Nobody else? Oh, that's awesome. Final point that I think is worth mentioning is recently Governor Inslee in Yakima said, "I'm removing my mask because of the First Amendment."
Yeah.
And he exempted himself from the entire mask mandate because of the First Amendment. He's not the only one in the state of Washington that has a First Amendment right, but he hypocritically said, I'm going to go at I'm glad you guys are all wearing masks, but I took mine off because of the First Amendment. People see that this is unequal treatment, that there's one set of rules for Inslee and the people that back him, and there's a different set of rules for people like us. And I think that disparate treatment has really rubbed people raw when you see Costco open, Walmart open, all the big corporations open, but a small mom and pop store is somehow viewed as selfish and heartless if they want to simply exercise their rights to service their customers and take care of them as well. So the thing that's frustrating, I think, for me and for a lot of citizens out there is that there is this disparate treatment that the government is doing, where there's one set of rules for Inslee and his allies and a different set of rules for everybody else. And I think that when we see what other states are doing and seeing that the governor of South Dakota, basically one of my favorite points of this is that after she did this, after she signed the back to normal order, they threw her a parade. Nobody in the state of Washington is putting a parade on for Jay Inslee right now.
No, we heckled him. We heckled him.
Heckled him in Tri-Cities. I was just in Tri-Cities yesterday. Nobody heckled me. So it was a nice contrast. But it's a serious point that COVID was a challenge. It didn't have to be a crisis. He made it a crisis by his overreaction to it. And I think his insecurity made him keep it in lockdown because it would mean that he was wrong. And it's more about him than it is about us. And so with that, we'll open it up to questions. And I think the meat of the lawsuit, obviously, Steve's the best one to answer it, but any political questions as well. Anything, Essex?
Время сейчас для вопросов и
First
ответов.
for you, Tim. I noticed it has been in the news, the governor even showed these pictures yesterday, that now Vice President Pence is promoting mask use. Even President Trump is promoting mask use. Are they wrong?
They are promoting it. They're asking people to do it. They're not passing a mandate. 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. There's a fundamental difference between encouraging it, asking people to do it, thinking that it's a good thing to do, and another thing to take it to the next level and use governmental police power to enforce it. I think that's the fundamental distinction that I think all of us feel passionately about. Frankly, for the last couple of weeks or so, I'm seeing more and more people wearing masks. Before he mandated it, but for Inslee, even having one person defy him was one too many, and he had to mandate it. And when he did that, he fundamentally moved from a representative into a ruler. And we just didn't elect him to rule over us. We elected him to represent us. And I had 8 years of problems with Chris Gregoire as a Democrat, but she was kind of a normal Democrat. I had problems with 8 years of Gary Locke, but Gary Locke was kind of a normal Democrat. I can't even call Jay Inslee a Democrat anymore, the way he's acting right now. It is not the way we're used to seeing it. And we do normally vote Democrat in the state of Washington because we're used to saying, Democrats, there's kind of a normal crazy. We've now reached completely off the rails crazy. And I think that voters have a big problem with that. And so the fact that the federal government is saying, encouraging it, nothing wrong with that. What Jay Inslee done is taken it to the next step and saying, I'm not going to encourage it. I'm going to mandate it by law, enforced by 90 days in jail and $1,000 fines if you don't do it. I think that's just way too far.
There was a record number of new coronavirus cases reported yesterday. Why isn't mandating the use of masks a reasonable response to that emergency?
I'd like to answer that.
And I will too. But let's just, I want to compose myself a little bit. And
We are actually preparing an expert witness to come forward with hard data that's been provided by the state of Washington to the New York Times, and that's going to be part of this lawsuit, which will be before the judge. You know, you have this interesting record number of cases, but the real discussion point, I think, and this should be for the media, is the number of deaths. Because the number of deaths are a line that you cannot, and even there is some disparity in that, because they're saying you died with COVID rather than of COVID. So death certificates are an issue. The Washington Department of Health has had to correct its death records already as a result of the Freedom Foundation pointing out that you can't call a gunshot wound a COVID death. So they had to change those. And equally suspect is the methods by which they're tallying COVID cases. So when you for instance, we looked at Pierce County to give you an example. And 3 weeks ago, there was this enormous spike in the number of cases of COVID. Yet the number of deaths had flatlined at a very low level and continued. So you have to look, when you look at a number like that, you have to assume one of two things. Either one, suddenly there was a spike in immunity in Pierce County that has never been seen before, because you have this astronomical spike in cases, but the death rate continues down here, or somebody is using problematic methodology to determine what is a COVID case. That's what we're seeing. And so we have there's 27 counties in the state of Washington, which occupies 70% of its territorial space, that have had a total of 40 deaths from COVID since this thing began. That's not a crisis. The death rate among the population in Washington is 0.0174% is the death rate compared to the population in Washington. The incidence of dying from lightning is higher than that. Influenza is higher than that. So you have some. Once the graphics are seen by the court, you're going to see that there is really no emergency here whatsoever. That there's no inordinate emergency. And when you talk about the mask, let's talk about. Your question is a pretty good one. First of all, if you're wearing a mask, you have two things happening. One, any expectorant that comes from your nose to your mouth is being prohibited by the mask, hypothetically. It doesn't stop the transmission of the virus because the virus is smaller than any mask you can buy and goes through the pores. But equally true, if I'm not wearing a mask and any expectorant comes from me, it's blocked from entering your nose and mouth because you're wearing a mask as well. And so this is why if someone feels like wearing a mask, they can wear a mask and they can have some assurances that their mask, along with the social distancing and other things that are, standard strategies for maintaining your own hygiene, may work very effectively for you. But the fact of the matter is the mask is actually and has been proven to be totally ineffective in stopping the spread of the virus, but it is a mandate because people think it works. And so you have this concept of, but what it really is political speech. You see, the mask is not a healthcare item, it's political speech. And it is political speech that says, I am in submission to the government's decision about my health care. By the way, that violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it also violates the HIPAA Act, when you have medical disclosures that are none of the government's business. And more importantly, you have somebody at the government level saying, I'm now your doctor advising you as to your health care with no diagnosis, right? The Secretary of Health has never had me in his office to say, this is the condition of your lungs, this is the condition of your blood, this is the condition of your heart, none of that. But he's telling me, I'm making you use this particular medical disposition, wearing a mask, notwithstanding the fact that I have no knowledge about your health history, in order to enforce a certain health regimen upon you. That's why it's unconstitutional, that's why it's unlawful, that's why it's in violation of standing health laws. Recommending it, that's fine. You have an opinion, somebody else has an opinion, the president has an opinion, fine, give an opinion. Joe Biden has an opinion, fine, give an opinion. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. And somebody has the right to do it if they feel like it. But it strikes me that a person should be able to weigh their own health care and say, this mask is going to be good for me or this mask is not going to be good for me. We do know that the wearing of a mask causes hypoxia, and it also causes hypercapnia, which is where you're breathing your own bacteria back into, you're breathing gut bacteria directly into your lungs. I mean, that's what's going on by the wearing of a mask. Is there any liability for the Secretary of Health if thousands of people come down with hypoxia or come down with hypercapnia?
I'm sure. Immunity, right?
He claims immunity. I'm immune from my own medical malpractice.
See, with Jay.
But your system's not immune. Your system's not immune from sucking that bacteria into your lungs.
Mr. President, would you say the mic?
Oh, yeah, please. Go ahead. Sorry. Please. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there any circumstances, under your legal analysis, are there any circumstances where a governor can use emergency powers to protect against an epidemic or a pandemic, illnesses that are not bombs or missiles or invasion? Can the governor use emergency powers at all to protect against a pandemic?
That's a great question, and I can tell you, and my concern is what the Constitution says. It's not really a health concern. I'm not down here arguing health arguments. I'm down here arguing what the Constitution allows. The Constitution, now, when in Article 2, Section 42, that's been amended 4 times. And so the people in this state have looked at this issue over and over and over again. And they said, this is what we could do in a medical emergency. Now, or not a medical emergency, in an emergency. And in that particular provision of the Constitution, it says you can do things like you can move the seat of government, you can appoint legislators that have been bombed and killed, you can do this, you can do that. There's, I think, 12 particular provisions of the Constitution that can be ignored in an emergency. But it says expressly, you cannot ignore the right of habeas corpus, the right of free speech, the right to assemble, the right to due process. You can't ignore that. You can't alter it. You can't touch it. That's 4 times that's been considered by the electorate in Washington. So if the electorate wants to say, we have a medical emergency and we think the governor should have more powers concerning the issue of quarantine, which, by the way, under the federal government, the standard in the Code of Federal Regulations and in the U.S. Code amended, is that you have to prove that somebody is sick or you have reasonable belief that that person has been recently exposed to a sick person who has a contagious disease before you can quarantine them. That's the federal standard. And here, the whole state was quarantined when nobody was sick. I mean, the incidence was extremely low. So, really, the Constitution does not allow the governor to declare a medical emergency. And even so, even the generous state statute that we think violates the Constitution, RCW 3808, it says the governor can institute a curfew, the governor can prohibit you from being in public parks and in public places, but he can't touch a private business. He can't say who can enter a private business and who can't. That's not allowed. What he's operating under is this catch-all provision of the statute that says, and do other things necessary for the public health and safety. That is what we're putting in front of Judge Lanise, and we're saying, Judge Lanise, he may be able to do other things to secure public health and safety, but constitutionally, he cannot prohibit free assembly. He cannot molest or invade a person's privacy with contact tracers. He cannot take your private property without just compensation and due process. He cannot block the right to worship. I mean, you've got a huge, huge provision in the Washington Constitution talking about the free practice of religion. And that's bolstered by 250 years of American jurisprudence and a Revolutionary War that fought over that particular premise, the right to freely practice your religion.
Rowan was hoping to comment on it, then I'll go right after her.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to double back and answer S's question from another perspective of the numbers. We have to look at where the financial incentive is on this. When Accounting Today, a trade publication, not really highly controversial, is it? When they came out and published the financial incentive of $9,000 for each diagnosis of COVID, and then, depending on your state, $30,000 to $39,000 to hook someone up to a ventilator. We want to incentivize good behavior, don't we? We don't want to encourage. Wouldn't you say that there's probably, and the actuarial charts are going to have, the actuarialists are going to have lots of fun with this in insurance for years to come, breaking down who died of versus with COVID. We clearly have a financial incentive to declare, particularly since so many people have lost their businesses, have closed down. I have to wonder the numbers. The governor has not shown us this data. Where is he getting it? Let's dig into it. And while we're at it, I want a full audit. I want a full audit of unemployment of this entire state. You know, the traffic on the way down here.
And how much money did they really send to the
Yes.
For me, why is it you are skeptical of the numbers of people who are sick, the numbers of people who might benefit from everyone wearing a mask? Why are you skeptical of the numbers?
The numbers that they're giving us do not represent. I've personally been to some of the hospitals. Do you know of people who have been laid off? Lisa, how many of your fellow nurses that you keep in touch with and other medical professionals have been furloughed? Period. They closed the emergency tents. None of this, when it doesn't wash, it just doesn't wash.
So
Dr.
what's the
Kitchen
motive?
has addressed.
What's the motive to lie about the numbers?
Oh, power. I think we can all agree that this is about control. That was stated earlier. What are the ultimate ends? How much more control do we need to give up? Tomorrow is, I hesitate to call it Independence Day. It's the 4th of July. Can we really go out to the parks? Can we really barbecue? Can we go to the beaches when we are being asked? And except for exercise and various other different measures, it makes no sense. It's mandated. Absolutely. It's mandated. That's not freedom. My Jewish relatives came here to avoid things such as this. It's interesting. Most of my former communist escapee friends are looking at this propaganda and going, aha, we've seen this before.
Seen this before.
Да, мы знаем.
You
Мы
know?
знаем, что такое пропаганда в Советском
I
Союзе.
wanted to add that. Why are people skeptical of Jay Inslee? It's a question that answers itself. So, one of the neat things about our judicial process is that you're mandated to actually tell the truth. Jay Inslee press conference is not anybody under oath to tell the truth. One of the most instructive things that Jay Inslee did during this emergency is he shut down all the transparency laws in the state of Washington, saying that the Public Records Act is suspended. Open Public Meetings Act is suspended. You and the press are not able to double check the numbers because you can't access that information because he suspended your ability to double check those numbers. The thing that I am disturbed by is that he is being saying things and we have no idea if it's true. In a courtroom, however, where they actually have to put documents before the court, they have to assert that they're correct. I think people will have a lot more confidence once we have a battle over actual issues where both sides have to answer questions under oath. I think people will have a lot more confidence in it rather than just taking Jay Inslee at his word at a press conference where a reporter asked him a question and he responds, well, that's news to me that there's 6 blocks in Seattle that are been taken over by anarchists. That's news to me. I didn't know about that. You knew he knew about it, but he lied because he said he just didn't have a good answer to it. How many times has Jay Inslee been asked really tough questions and he will not answer them? It's because he doesn't have to. He's not under oath. In a courtroom, before Judge Lanise, this is Judge Lanise who said the Public Records Act applies to the legislature. This is a judge who isn't going to put up with any crap and any mistruths, and we get to find out the science and the data because they have to turn it over. So the efficacy of mass is in dispute. Some people think it helps, some people think it does no good. Why don't we find out in a court of law whether or not it actually helps?
I would like to know
I think
about the tainted test kits.
And there is a lot of things that we're being told, and we read it in the media, and we just don't trust you guys that much either. And it's not because you're bad guys, it's just you're only reporting what you're being told, and you can't access the information because the Public Records Act has been suspended during this emergency. What are we pushing for? What we're really fundamentally pushing for is let's go back to representative democracy. If we're successful in striking down all these emergency orders, then if they want to mandate masks, have a hearing on it, pass it in the House and the Senate, have Inslee sign it into law. If you want to mandate that everybody get a vaccine, pass a law, let's have hearings, let's do it that way. Don't allow one person to say for everybody, here it is today, and if you don't do it, 90 days in jail, $1,000 fine, no public hearing, no public participation, and we have to just take his word on it that he knows better than everybody else on this issue. We want to go back to a representative democracy where we have a voice in our government, and when we see him having a press conference one day saying, here's the rules today, next day he has a different rule, the following day a different rule, then Monday we're all waiting with bated breath over what's the new rule today. How do you run a business? How do you be a nurse? How do you be an attorney? How do you be a businesswoman? How do you be an activist? I have no idea because I don't know what Jay Inslee's thinking that day. And that is not our form of government. Our form of government is let's put these wacko ideas he's got that says we can't fish because if we're in the middle of a lake with a fishing pole and the hook is outside the water, I'm safe. But if I put the hook in the water, then I'm susceptible to COVID. That is what we're facing right now. And that, in a hearing, would be laughed at and ridiculed, and it would never be voted out of committee. But Jay Inslee felt like that one day, that made sense to him. And people look at that and just say, that makes no sense. Where did you come up with that idea? And he doesn't have to explain.
We need to get him back to normal.
We got to get back to representative democracy.
Back to our normal. Back to our normal.
So anyway, any other... Channel your favorite Brandy Cruz. Channel Keith Eldridge. Channel a different station. What question are not being asked?
If you're elected, you'll no longer have any emergency powers. So how will you protect Washingtonians? Because we'll still be in the middle of the pandemic.
I think the abuse of executive power is the worst thing that I've seen this governor do.
So how will you protect Washingtonians if you're elected governor?
Because I do not want to make decisions unilaterally for 7 million people. I would keep representative democracy going. I don't believe it should be 30 days. I don't think it should be 14 days. I think it should be 0 days that a governor can unilaterally make decisions for everybody. I think you need to actually have representative democracy work. But for people who say, well, that doesn't move fast enough in the midst of an emergency, I think what's more dangerous than any emergency is one person making all decisions for everybody. I get asked the question all the time, you're not wearing a mask, that's very dangerous. I say what's more dangerous is having a governor for 4 more years that doesn't respect us enough and is willing to make unilateral decisions without representative democracy. That's more scary to me than me not wearing a mask.
Suicide rates, the overdoses, he's completely
65% rate increase under Inslee.
Yeah, please, yeah, Lisa, dive in.
I'm not running for office. I just
That's
wanted
all
to
good.
add that.
Bang in.
65% rape increase under Inslee.
Use these
I'll
things.
say that. 65% rape increase while Inslee's been in office.
There you go. Right.
Simple enough.
One illegal nation state in Seattle.
Okay, Ms. Thomas, if you would stay close to the mic.
Yeah, Lisa again, yeah.
Because, yeah, you are the nurse here. People count on your expertise. Are you still in nursing?
Yeah, I'm a registered nurse. I've been in healthcare my entire life.
Working at a hospital?
I would not like to disclose where I'm working because
But let me just ask, are you working at a hospital? I don't need to know the name.
I am not working in a hospital right now.
Okay. A clinic, a doctor's office, something like that. Just give me general sense. I'm not, again, looking for the name.
I just
Nothing wrong with saying I don't want to answer.
Yeah,
that's okay.
I am actually, because of the way the governor's behaved, I feel uncomfortable now to disclose where I work. He's weaponized the medical community against us, and he's tied the hands of a lot of people in the medical community who want to speak out against his orders, but are not allowed to because they don't want to lose their job.
Do you feel your license would be threatened?
Yes.
When people listen to you as a nurse, they may get the idea that masks don't work. Do masks work?
The typical mask that you're seeing, like what you guys are wearing, although I've never really even seen exactly, there's so many kinds of masks, but the standard mask, even the FDA has said, those are not for a virus, an airborne virus. Those are merely to protect the healthcare worker. You're working on somebody's wound, you're cleaning it, the dressing, and it splatters at you. This is only to keep that from splattering into your mucous membranes of your nose or your mouth, or even into your eyes. So masks work to protect you from being splattered into your mouth. It's not for an airborne virus.
So they don't really work for preventing me from spreading coronavirus.
Not the standard mask that you're wearing.
If
no.
I may make a crude statement, is a fart held back by your pants or your skirt? It's very crude, but it's an appropriate comparison.
The viruses are very small. Viruses are very small, and even a TB mask, like the common that you're seeing, the N95 mask that you have to be fitted for in the hospital for TB patients, those have to be specifically fitted to you, and you have to go into a room, be tinted and tested to see and make sure the fit is absolutely perfect. And even when you wear your N95 mask, it's almost unbearable to go in there and have to take care of that patient that has TB. And you have a negative airflow room, you have the UV lights in there to kill the bacteria, and it's very uncomfortable. You can barely breathe for the few minutes that you wear it. And when you're done, you dispose of that mask biologically in a hazard bag. And then you go and you get fitted for a new one. So this notion of wearing this piece of cloth to protect you from a virus is just nonsense.
Yeah.
Why do you feel that wearing a mask is a form of political speech?
It is, as our attorney has stated, he stated it so perfectly. It is, Jay Inslee is not a doctor. He has no medical degree. I have the medical degree. I think he's an idiot. He's smart, but he's a smart idiot, if that's possible. But he has nailed it, right? So he wants to tell me that I need to wear this mask to protect myself and my children and other people, even though I'm homebound by his order. But he wants me to wear this mask in agreement with his proposition that this could be contagious the way he is saying. And I know it to be false. He's incorrect. I don't agree with his medical prescription that he's given me. So it's an insult to my intelligence. It's an insult to my medical intelligence to tell me that I need to wear that mask to protect myself in my house from a virus that I don't have.
So if you wore a mask, what would that be saying to people?
That I actually think Jay Inslee has any medical knowledge, that he's a medical authority over me. He knows nothing about me. He doesn't know anything about my lung condition. He doesn't know anything about my chronic condition. I know a lot of people that have claustrophobia, that have panic disorder. They have a lot of fear because of what he's created in the communities. And now he wants them to wear these masks. So it's overlapping fear on top of fear on top of fear. And I know the business community, to go into stores, this profound, like we say, shocks the conscience to go into the store and see every single person in the store wearing a mask. It shocks the conscience. You feel like you're on another planet. Jay Inslee's Planet Pluto. Well, there it is. You walk into the grocery store and there's Planet Pluto with everybody wearing a mask, not because they even agree, but it's because they've been told it's a crime if they don't. They're afraid that they're going to be punished.
And his recent thing that he talked about, where it wasn't even enough that he mandate it and say that citizens have to wear it or else it's 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. Now businesses are put in this awkward position that they are subject to $10,000 fines unless they make sure that everybody is wearing a mask, no service. This is pitting citizens against each other. It's ripping apart our social fabric. The idea that he's got this snitch list of 25,000 people snitching on one another creates dissension. I saw the North Dakota governor on the verge of tears saying that you have people pitted against each other on whether you're wearing a mask or you're not wearing a mask, because it's become a political issue now, because the president's weighed in on it, because Inslee's weighed in on it. What would give people greater confidence in the whole mask debate if it wasn't one person deciding it, if that had gone through public hearings, people had a chance to weigh in on it, they had a vote in the House and the Senate, and the governor signed it into law, at least you'd feel like there was some actual scrutiny done on it. When you just snap your fingers and say today the masks are mandated, but not getting into the details of what kind of mask, and sometimes they're okay, and why don't you just grab your shirt and put it over. And what drives me nuts is he also says, local law enforcement, I leave it to you to decide whether or not to enforce it or not. So that means that law enforcement is now in this awkward position where they're not being well thought of right now, put in this awkward position of deciding whether or not to enforce it or not enforce it. That they're now in this arbiter that's going to have unequal treatment. People are going to be frustrated and angry when one police officer says, I'm going to enforce it a different way, saying that it's idiotic and don't be a sheep, where you got others. It's all happening because it's one person deciding for everybody without any representative democracy, no participation by citizens. The court system is there when you see an elected official going outside the bounds of what the Constitution allows. And what we're ultimately asking is, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people what he's doing. Let's find out if a judge agrees with us or not. That's all you're asking Judge Lanise to do. Are we right, or is he okay making all decisions for 7 million people for as long as he wants? As long as he wants to say it's an emergency, it will be forever. These lawsuits are simply going to say, let's go back to our normal system of government, and if they want to declare a new emergency, let them call a new one. But this ongoing, it's an emergency as long as I say it's an emergency, it just doesn't feel right to people, and it's frustrating. And weaponizing labor and industries and health departments and SWAT teams and the barber in Snohomish being kind of hung out to dry. This is what happens to you when you stand up to the governor. When it's Mike Jellison, who owns a fitness center and he tries to stay open, and they send in these teams hitting him with $1 million fine if he doesn't shut down. In the city of Wenatchee, I went to Windmill Restaurant, and he has a restaurant filled with people, and he says, unless everybody gets up right now, leaves their food, and walks out, this owner of this restaurant will lose his liquor license for the rest of his life. When you see that kind of dictatorial action, it is not the action of a secure person in his own right. It's a weak person who's bullying people just like you see on the playground. And it's like, and this is the guy who's going to stand up to the bully. He's going to actually sock him in the nose, but he's actually just asking a judge to do it and just say, we did not sign up for this. And we can't wait until November to replace him. We need to have our government back now.
Yes, right.
So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I mean,
Before everybody goes, I just, for the plaintiffs, I just wanted to be sure I had correctly where everybody's from. Sir, you're Pasco.
Pasco, Washington.
Okay.
Lisa.
Richland, Benton County.
Franklin County.
Hecklers.
There you go. King County.
I'm sorry.
Grace Harbor and King.
Grace Harbor.
And actually help us with the other, Clint is from Franklin County.
I'm sorry, we're in Grace Harbor?
Elma.
Elma.
Fantastic.
But I go back.
But we are so grateful that so many people showed up today. I mean, it makes it such a big difference that it shows that the plaintiffs are simply representing the 7 million people that are wondering whether or not this all makes sense to them. And it's a great opportunity for us to be able to challenge that. There's another lawsuit that we're actually not involved with, but is in federal court on challenging the emergency order, and these are Republican legislators that challenged it, and they're before Judge Settle, and they're expecting a court ruling or a court hearing very soon on that case, saying the original rationale for the emergency is over, so let's get rid of that emergency and let's go back to representative democracy as well. So it's not just us fighting this fight, but the Freedom Foundation did an amazing job getting the Thurston County health director to back off. And so they filed in Lewis County, they did. So there's a lot of people that are fighting to try and find some judge somewhere, some court that is willing to look at this thing and say, God, it just doesn't seem right. And so important point again, we're not just throwing out the entire concept of everything the governor's doing. Let's just find out whether or not it's consistent with our constitutional rights.
Correct.
You don't have to choose between the two. So anyway, love you guys. Thanks a lot. Love you on Facebook Live. But thanks for coming out, guys. Appreciate it so very much. And we're just going to file our thing electronically, and so we'll send it to you later today. Thank you very much, everybody. Love you guys. Appreciate it very much. Have a great 4th of July, Independence Day. I'm going to be going to Boom City, get that illegal fireworks that we're all supposed to not get, but it's going to be awesome. I'm going with my daughter, Riley, and of course, she's haranguing me to get some fireworks. And so I don't know where we're going to light it off. I got to find some city that allows it. So anyway, love you guys. Thanks a lot for listening in. It's a good day today. Suing Jay Inslee, always a good thing, and actually getting a very good judge. We're lucky to have this Judge Lanise, Harvard-trained lawyer that became a judge, and he's the guy who actually said the Public Records Act applies to the legislature. So this is a judge that's willing to challenge the establishment if you make a good argument for it. So, love you guys.